Okay. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. This is Brian Sheffy from Genealogy Adventures.
And this is Danya Williams. How you guys doing today?
Hope you guys are doing well. And Donnie and I we just really want to give a shout out to the people of California because we know that you guys are going through it. So you're in our thoughts and prayers.
Yes,
And
yes.
for family, friends, and citizens down in the Gulf states because we know you guys are bracing for not just one hammering from a hurricane, but two. So you guys stay safe. You guys are in our thoughts. So today is special because, as you know, we're not, season 4 doesn't start until the 27th of September. But there have been a lot of kind of politicized conversations about race going on in social media. A lot of it is around Vice Presidential candidate Kamala Harris. And that prompted some conversations between Donnie and I. And at one point, I can't remember if it was me or if it was Donia, but one of us said, "Look, this is a really good conversation, and we need to do a genealogy special, and kind of share it with the audience, and to also get your feedback." And Donnie, do you want to jump in there?
Yeah. My thing is that this whole thing with I was really excited that you actually came up with this idea to talk about this because you and we've always had this conversation about what do we call ourselves, how we discuss what we find on the census record. One minute we are what colored, the next minute we're Negroes, another minute we're African Americans, sometimes we see mulatto. You see so much different stuff on the census records, on the guides, on all different kinds of things. So I was just so excited when you came up with it, and it was just so funny. You were like, well, who could we get to include on this? And I'm like, we don't need anybody. We go through it all the time. So yeah, let's do it. I was really in on let's do this show. Let's do this show. So yeah, I'm excited.
So actually, so if you'd like to make me a host temporarily, and then
Okay.
I'll come back to you. So the way that we're going to structure this kind of conversation, first of all, Donnie and I want to say that this is, while this is going to be a wide-ranging discussion, we don't have a solution. We just want to have the conversation first, and then maybe another stage would be suggestions about ways forward. But I guess where you and I were kind of in agreement is we wanted to get from the past to where we are today, and just all the kind of stuff that we saw a lot of on social media. So the first part of this conversation is going to, and I'm really, really sorry about it, but it's going to be a little bit of a history lesson about the evolution of what we've been called, and then I guess racial labels that we've chosen to call ourselves. And hopefully in the course of discussing this first part of it, you're going to get an understanding that it's coming up with an inclusive racial category for people of African descent, not just in this country, but throughout the Atlantic region of the planet, is a really tricky proposition because we're not a
Right.
monolithic people. We don't have it, we our Africanness is expressed in different places, all depending on what country or what colony a slave ship rocked up to. But we all share pretty much the same origins. So I wanted to start in the 1600s. I'm throwing up my image now. Do a little shared screen. Right. So this is a document that was written in 1671. It is a Maryland document. And first of all, if you're a genealogist and you're looking at this, what looks like chicken scratch, most of us are kind of used to it. If this is the first time you've seen this kind of a document, I'm not going to read the whole thing. There are just certain bits that I wanted to highlight. So I highlighted the date at the top, underlined in red, 1671. And then the first word that's underlined is Negroes. And for all of the research that I've done in the 1600s in colonial America, and it doesn't matter if it's Virginia, New Sweden, New Amsterdam, they're using one of two descriptors, Africans or Negroes. And that's it. It's always swapped between those two. Virginia, for some reason, started saying Africans with like the first people that were there in the 1619 and 1620. But slowly, as I start working my way through documents, African gets dropped, it's replaced with Negroes. And that's kind of our categorization. And they kind of stayed that way for for over a century. We were referred to as Negroes. Now, that's not the name that we came up with ourselves at all. Um, and as various family members of mine marry Africans, I've had really good conversation with people who are African who are like, well, we're not Black, we're African. And if we're and then further categorizing themselves by their ethnicity, whether they're Yoruba or Igbo, that's their identification. So that's been an interesting conversation for me to have in the kind of here and now. But again, this is something that we're going to be talking about through the course of this kind of special, is a lot of these categorizations are categories or racial designations or ethnic designations that we as a people didn't come up with. This is how we were labeled, and we kind of had to live with that for a long time. So earlier this morning, okay, sorry, I'm new to this whole screen sharing thing. So earlier today, I shared a document, which is this one. It's a PDF to download. If you didn't download it already, the link to this PDF is in the Genealogy Adventures Facebook page. You can download it and read it at your leisure. It is a wonderful journal article called Changing Racial Labels from Colored to Negro to Black to African American. They even left out Afro-American. I realized that Afro-American actually preceded African American. It's written by Tom Smith. And the first part that I wanted to actually kind of cover was on page 497, and I've got to take my glasses off to read this. So basically, the word colored was the dominant. So we go from Negro to colored. So from 1600s and 1700s were Negroes, and then things start swapping over in the 1800s, otherwise known as the 19th century. So colored was the dominant term in the mid to late 19th century. It appears to have gained the upper hand because it was accepted by whites as well as Blacks, and was seen as more inclusive, covering mulattoes and others of mixed ancestry, as well as those with complete Black ancestry. I would argue about the word complete. I get what he means, but I'm not going to quibble about word choice. Others saw it as too inclusive, however, covering not only Blacks or mulattoes, but Asians and other non-white races. And that's coming from an academic paper written by Litwack in 1979, Miller in 1937, and Wilkinson in 1990. Then late in the 19th century, Negro began to gain greater acceptance. So already we've gone from Negro to colored to Negro.
And what's the time frame in that? Let's talk about, that's the thing that gets me, the time frame.
Based on this article, and I guess even our own research, it looks as though colored began to change. The difference between colored and Negro, I think it changed right around the time of emancipation. That's the kind of feeling that I get in terms of the time period that you're referencing. It said then in the late 19th century, Negro began to gain greater acceptance. And that probably maps onto when a lot of our formerly enslaved ancestors, and even those who were free, started moving into professions. They became teachers, educators, farmers, business people, politicians, entering fields that had been that they had been excluded from. And is that the kind of sense that you get, Danya?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, for instance, John Yeldow, aka Elijah Fleming, he was a civil rights activist. I can't recall him ever referring in that was the 1880s, 1890s, 1900s, and I can't remember him ever calling himself colored.
Never.
He always seemed to use the term Black or Negro. So the movement to replace colored with Negro was led by such influential Black leaders as Booker T. Washington, W.E.B. Du Bois, and there's some indication that Negro was favored by Civil War freedmen, while colored was more popular amongst the established community of Blacks, emancipated before the 13th Amendment. So again, I'm already getting a sense that there wasn't even a universal thumbs up for either one of those terms. Already we're getting one group of people who seem to like to refer to themselves as colored, and another group of people who like to refer to themselves as Negro. Keep that in mind, because that lack of unanimous kind of approval echoes down to this day. So we've had over a century to try to crack this nut, and we haven't done it. So according to Kelly Miller in 1937, Negro is also seen as a stronger term. And he says, usually where deep-seated philosophical meaning is involved, Negro is a much stronger term of the two, between Negro and colored. Try, if you will, to express the idea involved in Negro art, Negro music, Negro poetry, and the Negro Yearbook, which is a periodical. I can't remember when it was published, in terms of the word colored, and we see what a lamentable weakness would result in the substitution. So that's the kind of point that he's making. So going back to the next one. Okay. And is that one? Oops, share screen. Share. So this is the next page. Tom Smith is going on to point out that within this time frame, Negro also had considerable handicaps to overcome. And then he goes through kind of what those handicap perceptions were. Obviously, Negro became corrupted with the N-bomb, which I'm gonna get into that, but that's an offshoot of the word Negro. So despite the derogatory baggage, derogatory meaning the N-bomb, the edge began to shift to Negro. In part, it appeared to be a better specific term for Blacks. Colored was seen as too generic and too generic of a term, and one that did not seem to provide specific group identity or define Blacks as people. The rising number of Asian immigrants may have made the over-inclusiveness of colored a more serious drawback, and at the same time, Negro had to be stretched to cover mulattoes and other of mixed ancestry who were far from being physically Black and were not considered as appropriately described as Negro by some. I can relate to that. May come back to that later in the show. Well, I might as well say it now. So myself and a lot of my family members, obviously living in this country, we always identified as Black, but we were told that by Black people that we weren't. So then we identified as African American, and that caused some issues with some more the kind of militant members of the Black community, which kind of leaves you wondering, well, I'm a person of African ancestry. I want to have an identity that encompasses my Africanness as well as the other parts of our family history, because we're a very admixed family. We've got influences coming from all over the place. And it seemed as though no matter what label we tried to use to describe ourselves in a way that was inclusive of our Africanness, that was rejected by some. So we settled on the identification person of color. And we thought that was a good compromise. It's still acknowledging the fact that we're not white, we'll never be white. Even if we have Native American ancestry, but we will never be Native American. We have Jewish ancestry, but we will never be Jewish because we don't practice that faith. But we also want to include the African. So we thought that that was a good compromise. And of course, now with this highly politicized kind of environment that we live in America, that's also deemed to be not good enough. But we will revisit that a little bit later on in the broadcast. So Tom Smith goes on to say, as Negro gained acceptance, there was a second prolonged struggle over its spelling. And this is covered by various academic papers that are cited here. There's Allen in 1990, Allport in 1954, Bennett in 1970. I mean, a lot of people have written about this. Advocates of its use insisted that it be capitalized, which is what is it the Associated Press, the AP? Are they the ones who've recently made the kind of editorial policy that Black is now it's categorized? It's either Reuters or the AP, or or maybe it's the New York Times. I'm gonna have to look at that, but someone recently made that editorial decision. It's a publishing, an American publishing company decided to capitalize the B in Black. As a New Orleans paper argued in 1878, the French, German, Irish, Dutch, Japanese, and other nationalities are honored with a capital letter, but the poor sons of Ham must bear the burden of a small n. That's coming from a person called Litwack in 1979. A breakthrough was finally achieved by the NAACP when the New York Times announced in an editorial in 1930 that in our style book, it was the New York Times who did the capital B, I stand corrected. In our style book, Negro is now added with a capital N, is now added to the list of words to be capitalized. It is not merely a typographical change, it is an act of recognition of racial self-respect for those who have been for generations in the lowercase. Then in the 1950s, we go from Negro to Black. So if you're getting a sense that this is all kind of going in roundabouts, you would be correct. And I'm going to skip that one. I'm trying to get the one about Jesse Jackson in the 1970s. Okay, here we go. Share screen. Sorry, there's not much more to go on this one. Okay, share. So Negro, capital N, was the dominant term throughout the 1960s, with colored seeing occasional use. I have seen it. I think it was a 1930 or a 1940 US federal census. As you know, you're talking about how these back and forth. I have seen the term colored used for various people in the 1930s, 1940s. Not very often, but it did pop up. So Tom is going on to say, Negro was the dominant term through the 1960s with color seeing occasional use. Black with a capital B, then gained ascendancy in the early 1970s, and since the mid-1970s has been virtually the only term used. In fact, the Negro/colored to Black switch is even more concentrated than figures that Tom Smith in his article kind of goes over. Then we go from Black to African American. Afro-American seems to have gotten left out of this type paper. Being a child of the 60s, I remember hearing the term Afro-American, so that was definitely a 60s thing. From the early 1970s to the late 1980s, the position of Black was virtually unchallenged. It was preferred by a large majority of Blacks, was used almost exclusively by Black organizations, and was virtually the only term for Blacks used in surveys. But then in December 1988, at a meeting of Black leaders in Chicago, Romana H. Edelin, president of the National Urban Coalition, proposed that African American replace Black. This group endorsed the switch and launched a campaign in favor of African American that received wide attention. Jesse Jackson, as the group's spokesperson, announced, just as we were called colored, but we were not that, and then Negro, but we were not that, to be called Black is just as baseless. That was kind of his central argument, and you can read more about that argument in the PDF download, and I believe there's only one more to go. Okay, and here we go, and share. So to kind of sum up that move to African American, the main goal of the switch was to give Black a cultural identification with their heritage and ancestral homeland. furthermore, it was seen as putting Blacks on a parallel with white ethnic groups. And again, this is about the term African American. On one level, this referred only to comparable linguistic terminology, for example, African/Polish American. But on a deeper level, the shift to a culture and a homeland-based term like that used by other groups, reconceptualized Blacks as an ethnic group rather than a race. And that's coming out of Ebony, 1989, and a paper written by Williams in 1988. And with that, Tanya, I'm going to hand you back the controls. Make host. Are you the host again?
I am the host again.
That terrifies. I'm just going to say that terrifies me. You Zoom host terrifies me.
Well, you did an excellent job. You did an excellent job.
Thank you.
You did an excellent job.
That's kind of a slightly longish, tortured history of a group of people trying to come up with an identification. I'm going to say something before Danya jumps in. My whole impression about this whole thing, even to this day, is we are not a monolithic people. We do not have a monolithic experience. We have roughly similar experience, similar shared experiences, similar shared histories. But I get the need for an identification. It is one of the most basic human drives to identify with a specific group of people. And as much as it pains me to say this, I probably came to this realization about 15 years ago. I don't think that will ever work for people of African descent with ancestry in America or the Americas. For us, it's prior to 1865, anywhere else in the Atlantic world during the period where they were enslaved. Because we were very, very, well, I shouldn't say that. What percentage of Black Americans who fit that criteria do you think are like 100% or 90% and above African?
So, okay, I'm gonna jump in. So here we
go. Well, I just wanted to say that this one bit is slavery has destroyed that for us. You know, I can never say that, even though I have Angolan, Liberian, Benin, and Togo, there's just too many. There's no one African ethnic group that I can use like Angolan American or Benin American or Congolese American. That's slavery. For me, and I guess in my mind and in my opinion, slavery kind of destroyed that for us. And Don, jump in.
Well, as you were going through the article, there were several people, you know, really kind of asking questions like, first, who wrote the article, asking about it. But you guys can get the article. It is on Genealogy Adventures. You can download it and you can see it for yourself. And people were, you know, actually starting to pay attention to their birth certificate. You had some people who were saying their birth certificate either labeled them as Black or colored, or some were labeled as Caucasian, even though they were Black, or, you know, it all depended on, you know, what it was that they were saying. But my thing, as far as this whole thing with gender, well, not with, as far as whether we're African American or what have you, I tend to go as Black, and maybe because that's what I grew up on. But then, oh my goodness, it closed out. Well, I think we're still, it says we're still live, so yeah. But I tend to go, I tend to go as Black. So with me, I want to make sure. You guys still there?
Oh, actually, let me I'll look at my phone.
Okay, we're still here. Okay, because I think it's my computer. I don't know what just happened. Anyway, yeah, well, I go as Black, maybe because of when I was born, you know, what I was reared as, I consider myself as a Black person, even though I'm not Black in color. I don't think that, I don't look at it as me being Black in color. But it's just so weird with all of these different things that are going on at this time period, because now it's not just about your, what you go as far as your race is concerned, because now they also throw in your gender. Like it's a big deal about your gender and who you are, because my son talks to me all the time about what your gender is. You know, women are supposed to be, women and men, because you told me that they do the same thing for men, like we're supposed to be cis. I've been a woman all my life. Now you're telling me I'm supposed to be cis. I'm just learning about this. So I'm like, all because of transgender men or transgender women. I mean, like, this whole thing is, it's mind blowing on how your life is just supposed to change because of something. Like I don't know. So
I guess my 2 cents worth is, it's one thing as a society to sit down and come up with labels that both, using the example that you've given, that different communities can have input into, but most specifically, it's the community or communities that are most directly impacted. And I guess as I was saying in the first part of the show, is in terms of racial labels aimed at us, a lot of them weren't, we didn't come up with them.
right,
Uh,
that I
had
know.
someone asked, I don't know, Emmanuel Cambo back in 1620, whatever, what are you? He would have turned around and said he was Angolan or that he was African. He would have
Right.
never said, he would have never called himself a Negro. He would have never called himself Black. Those were foreign concepts to them.
Yeah, but if you look at now, okay, so with that being said, let's look at that, because given the fact that you had these African tribes selling these the African spoils to these British people, selling these enslaved people and then taking them over, they were selling different tribes. So these were different people that they were selling. So each individual one was somebody from a different tribe. So they had to group them as something. And maybe that's what it was. I mean, when you really kind of think about what it was, okay, this person was from this tribe, and this person was from this tribe, and this person was from this tribe. So they had to make things easy for themselves to say, okay, well, they're all this one particular group. All right, well, they fit this color, so let's go and call them this color. Or they're all colored people, so let's all call them this. Let's all call them colored people. I'm the person that rationalize shit. I'm not. Oops, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, y'all. Okay, let me say this. We forgot to do we forgot to do the disclaimer. I'm so glad we're not under the show. I'm so glad we're not under the show. Let me do the disclaimer. Y'all, I got a headache and my migraines are on fire. So I didn't mean to do that. But
yes, stuff.
okay. But yeah, so seriously, you know, that's probably what it was. I try to rationalize stuff, even though some may not like it. You still sometimes just have to, you have to put it all in a box, and you have to y'all laughing at me, stop laughing at me. So so you have to put it all in a box. You can't just, you gotta do it so that, to make it, you make yourself understand it. And that's what we have to do. Unfortunately, there were different people that was on that boat. And when they came across that boat, they came across that boat when they were placed in, before they were placed in that boat, they were placed in that boat, they were enemies. But when they got in that boat, they were all the same people in the same situation, in the same problem, in the same everything about it. And they were no longer enemies anymore. They had, and it just put them in this whole other situation. It just placed them in this whole other situation. So, and in placing them in this whole other situation also made them one.
It
You
did
know,
indeed.
yeah. So that's what I think happened. And if it happened in that way, then they grouped them. And I think that's where the grouping came in at. That's where the grouping started. When they came across that boat, when they came across that water. And yeah.
Because again, I guess the way that I think of it in my mind is we are grappling with an unnatural, human-created system, and I'm gonna agree it's a cost system. I thought that was a brilliant article. I will try to find the article. It came out last week or the week before. Um, I will try to post that because race is a man-made concept that didn't happen as we think of it until the mid 1600s. As I was telling Dania before the show, I actually did a lot of reading about the evolution of the word race in terms of a European context. Now, Europeans were using the word race as early as the 1500s, but they did it in a very different way. They were described, for them, race was synonymous with ethnicity. So when you see British people writing about race, they'd say things like the Italian race, the German races, the Asian races. Sorry, so they're doing it like that, denoting between sub-Saharan, subcontinental Indians, plus the people of Central Asia. So they were using it in a very different way. It didn't denote skin tone. It was denoting cultural differences and ethnic differences. When it started to become the term, race started to become the term that we think of it today, was all due to slavery. These people had to rationalize what they were doing. So they reinvented the term race to then apply to the enslavement of dark-skinned people. Oh, actually, I've got the perfect quote for that. Race was the exploitation of non-Europeans for profit. It was as simple as that. This came from an academic called Adams. So I'll repeat that. Race was the exploitation of non-Europeans for profit. And I'm not going to get into the argument that everyone else did slavery. Yes, they did. They had different forms of slavery. Most of them was not a life sentence, not a condition passed down to their children. Europeans did that mess. They started that. And ever since then, we've been grappling with this artificial creation. Now, in terms of that, I like what some African communities have actually done. They like Liberia and Liberia and Sierra Leone. Some of them refer to themselves as African Creoles. Why can't we just describe ourselves as African Creoles? African American Creoles, even.
Okay, I'm getting ready to turn into my mother. Why can't I just be human?
Amen.
And some, and then the other thing, why can't let me just be real, and this might make some people real angry. Why can't I be American? Because that's where I was born. Now, I'm not knocking my ancestors. Let me be clear on that, because I know my ancestors, and I love my ancestors because they guide me, and I would not be here without them. I would not be. But I posted something on my page yesterday that was shared by one of my cousins, and it was talking about, in order for me to be, I had to have two parents, 4 grandparents, and it went all the way down to like 12 generations, which made about 4,098 people in order for them to make me. Now, within those 4,098 people, according to my DNA, I am 15% European. And amongst that European, that means that I have Asian, I have Native American, I have a mix. I'm Jamaican. I have so much. So because of all of those different things, it wasn't just African. There was a whole bunch of people amongst that 4,098 folks that created me. So because it was all of those people, why do I have to choose just African on that one side? Out of all of that, I am American because that's where I was born. Because I have Asian that is amongst that. And I have Jamaican that is amongst that. And I have Caribbean that is amongst that. But because my skin color and because my DNA is more African, you want me to choose African? But I'm American. So those are my issues. I was born here. So
no, and I agree. I'm on the same page as you. When I say that I'm a person of color, it's taking pride in strength from both my enslaved ancestors and my free people of color, because they had very different experiences, but they both went through it in very different ways.
Right.
I wouldn't be as strong mentally and spiritually as strong as I am without having inherited their mental strength, their spiritual fortitude. But at the same time, I want to pay respect to my Jewish great-grandfather, whose family went through hell back in Belarus and Russia. They suffered. They suffered. Mm-hmm. They suffered in a different way than enslaved Africans or free people of color, but they suffered. I want to pay homage to my Irish Catholic ancestors who were brutalized by the English and the Scottish to some extent in Ireland. Their history is filled with trauma, which is most of the reason why they came here for a fresh start and a new start. And even when they rocked up here in colonial America, they were treated a little better than animals. They were free. They were they were indentured. Then they became free, but they didn't have any. I want to be able to be inclusive of all the parts of my ancestry. And Native American, I don't even have to get into that. We know how Native Americans suffered in this country. I too have links to Bermuda and Jamaica, going back to the colonial times. The more I read about how slavery was practiced in the British-held colonies in the Caribbean, that was a horror show. I mean, let's face it, slavery was a horror show no matter where it was practiced in the Atlantic world. I haven't read enough about Latin America, Mexico, or South America to kind of really understand just how brutal it was there, but we know slavery was brutal.
Right.
End of story. And I don't see why I should be challenged, like you, to just pick one set of ancestors.
That's right.
To the exclusion of all others. And the reason why I'm so mixed is most of it's because of slavery. The Jewish bit wasn't. But America's a melting pot. So I'm getting all these different influences. I mean, we haven't even discussed the fact that we've got a smidgen of Chinese. We still haven't figured out.
How about that?
We still haven't
These
figured out.
eyes ain't like this for nothing. You know what I'm saying? I don't have small eyes for nothing. This is not here, for no other reason. But let's go to, you mind if we go to
the questions? No, by all means.
Okay. So my thing had cut off for a minute. It cut off when everybody started laughing at me. Okay. So it says, why is it that as African Americans, Black, Negro, our ethnicity changes with different times and eras? I feel if you have Black and white descent, then mulatto seems to be a good choice. But then you had some people who didn't like that. So it's not questions, this is more statements.
I guess subjectively thinking, I think, and by all means, audience, do come in with your comments. I think mulatto is a loaded term. It's loaded with so much history, that word.
Yeah. It's actually derogatory for some people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead. What was you going to say?
And again, with that one, I mean, I know mulattoes were all over the colonies and the early republic, well, the republic period. But again, specifically thinking about people from Louisiana, you know, their history settlement of British North America. So, you know, they've got that Spanish and French influence as well as African and Caribbean for their kind of uniquely mulatto community. But I just get the feeling that mulatto is just a historically loaded word.
Yeah. Let's see. Do you see anything?
I'm looking. We've got a lot of comments.
Yeah, it's a lot of comments. Everybody's just kind of giving their own opinion. So Yakota Strong says, we are very, very American. My ancestors were in Louisiana before it was part of the U.S. Shelley Murphy says, I like mulattoes. So many ancestors were identified as such. I'm trying to find, Tiffany had made a comment about the mulatto statement and I think it was further up, so I can't find it.
I'm just gonna say a quick hi, Janice. We Tony and I love Oggs too. You know, we we love you guys.
Oh goodness, this disappeared on me. That was
okay. Well, we do have Ayawa Evans. Oh, sorry, I'm not confused about. I misread it. She just said I'm not confused about the who, what, and why about my polyethnic identity. I'd love to hear from her if she's ever been challenged on it. Like I said, I am not confused about mine, but
yeah, I'm not confused either.
But I get challenged, or my siblings get challenged, or my cousins and my aunts and uncles get challenged in the terms over the years that we have used to describe ourselves. And to tell you the truth, after a while, I am such an archetypal Aquarian. I will switch it off, which is why I've settled on people of color. I'm like, look, I have been challenged in every single way. When I've used Black and African American, I'm going to say people of color. And if you have a problem with that, that's on you. I'm 54 years old and I am just tired of this argument.
So Carol Osborne said, same ancestry as myself, Danya, but not American. I would love for her to elaborate on that.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting.
Yeah, that sounds interesting. And then David Vaughn said, American is a nationality. Nationalities can change and also be taken away from you. I'd like you to elaborate on that as well.
Well, I'm going to say, because you're speaking, I'm a person who lived in England for 30 years. I'm a dual citizen of both America, my birthplace, and the United Kingdom, my adopted country. And it was even with an increasingly British accent, I was never mistaken for being anything other than American. And that's well, actually in Britain, it's so much more simplified. You're either white or you're Black. And then within your whiteness and Blackness, you have your kind of ethnic breakdown. So you have Afro Brits, you have Afro Caribbean Brits. I was an African American Brit. That's just how they do it.
Okay. Darius Brown, this is interesting. He said, I think these titles force you to pick which ancestors you should identify with the most. And I think that's wrong. See, I think the color of my skin is forcing me to pick which ancestor I'm supposed to identify with the most. Because it's really kind of funny that because I have one cousin who refuses to identify with Preston Brooks because he was a racist person. He will not identify with him. And I actually identify with him because I see where I get my attitude from. Like I see it. That's just what it is. I know. I get it. And I understand it, and I see the direction. So because I see the direct, I've said things out of my mouth that is exactly what he has said. And it is mind-blowing that I've done that. And I know where it comes from. So and then I've looked at my own family, and I can see not only, and let me say this, it's not just the bad side of him. I can also see where we get our political background from. Everybody, there's at least one person in my family that has always been into politics. Every generation in my family has always been into politics. Well, now I see where it comes from. I actually see it. I actually understand it. So you start to see you see yourself in your family. I don't care if they're black, white, purple, green, red, yellow, it doesn't matter. You see yourself in your family. So how do you not identify with it? It's
And
impossible.
to expand on that, well, on both sides of my family, we have cousins who are Black, who identify as African American, who range from blonde-haired, blue-eyed. You look at them, you would swear they were Germanic or Scandinavian, all the way down to very dark-hued people. And we're family. We don't look at those different. You family, your family. We don't care if you're tall, short, skinny, not skinny, blonde-haired or blue-eyed, or what do they call it? One of the sweetest berries in the family. Your family. There's no judgment. There's no nothing about that. And I loved growing up in that kind of a family. Yeah, it's not seeing those differences. Those differences didn't matter. It's actually seeing people for themselves. So I'm scrolling through these comments. We have a lot of comments.
We have a lot of comments. Yeah, I'm looking at them. Somebody is talking about the book Cast that you were talking to me about too.
Yeah.
Recommend reading Cast by Isabel Wilkerson.
Yes.
They're talking about that.
Mm-hmm. And Henry Goins, and again, there's never going to be a term or terms that's going to apply to everyone. Henry Goins makes a really good point. I have a friend who's white and Black and he hates mulatto. Yeah. I know people who are white and Black and they hate the term biracial.
Tiffany says, I think government wants people to identify as Black because they want people who are more melanated to be confused about their ethnic groups. Take the history away. We're going to talk about that. Take the history away and remove the person from their ethnicity so that they will be unable to identify with a culture, history, etc. So go ahead, because I think I know which way you're going.
No. I was going to tell you, make the point that you made to me over the phone about funding and federal government.
Yeah. So then that's the other thing as far as the government is concerned, because a lot of people don't understand the reasoning for the census. The census, one of the things that the census record does is when you're taking the census, you're marking off what you are. So if you go to that other box and you put African American and another person puts Black and another person puts something else, biracial, and another person puts colored or what have you, each one of those things splits that money. And it splits that money in different areas. So you have a third going to this, a third going to that, something else going to this. That's breaking up the money for the community for each area. I don't think people realize that. I know some people do, but that's what that does. So we don't get the money that we're supposed to receive when you're breaking up that money like that. So if we're not all uniform, and putting what we're going to put, then we're not receiving the amount of money that we're really supposed to get. Talk
So
about the government.
how do you think we can combat that? Would it be for people, and I'm just going to say people of African descent in this country, that instead of the government dictating that to us, we dictating to the government, this needs to change. And for these following terms, depending on what people tick, that's just the African American community, or however people wanted to describe that community. So instead of breaking those payments out, it's just, well, okay, we know that we have to aggregate those payments for the entire community. In other words, I'm trying to say, tell the system to work for us instead of financially dividing and conquering.
We first need to work for each other, and we
Well,
don't.
yeah, absolutely.
You know, I mean, if we don't, we just don't. And until we start working with each other, it's not. I mean, they're good because we don't work with each other. We're always working against each other. My mom's favorite statement is, "There's a whole bunch of chiefs, and don't nobody want to be the Indian. Don't nobody want to be the worker. Everybody want to be the chief." You and I, we work together. Sometimes I'm the chief. Sometimes you're the chief. Sometimes I work under you. Sometimes you take what I say. Or, you know, I mean, we know how to work together. And then we have a group that we work with where sometimes you're the lead. Sometimes Loretta's the lead. Sometimes Hamad's the lead. We step back. That Settles family, I don't touch them. And I'm happy to be like this. What you want me to do? Oh, okay. And I will go and do. You need me to do what? Okay. And I will go and do. You don't never have to worry about me. You are the lead person for the Moses Williams Project. It is you. And we go to you when you want something done. We're like, okay, which way do you want us to go? You're the lead person for that. I'm the person for the Yeldales. We all know that. Danya, this is what we found for the Yeldales. This is the direct. Okay, well, we need to go and we need to look at this. Loretta and Hamad are the Settles. You and I are the Petersons. We know who we go to when we come for all of these things. So it all depends. We know the direction. But if everybody tries to be the lead on something, you're never going to get where you're supposed to go. It's never going to happen.
And do you think the other missing part of the equation is a lack of honest, true, historically accurate education in teaching in history about the children, about the African diaspora?
Yes. Yes, most definitely. And then not only that, I also think that as far as genealogy is concerned, I feel like that this is also missing from this genealogy as a whole is missing. I think that you know, historians, and this is not a knock to them, please. And if there are any historians this in the chat, I am not knocking y'all at all. However, you are taught what they want you to know. Period. Genealogical research, you are learning what your ancestors want you to know. You're literally learning what your ancestors went through, what they lived in during the time that they were living. So you see what they saw. Whereas in history, and I hope this is making sense what I'm trying to say, but whereas when you're doing history and you're researching in history, you're actually putting out, you're only learning what they want you to know. You're only getting the information that they want you to know about. You're not actually sitting there looking at what your grandparents or your great-great-grandparents saw, because I actually learned that while my two-time great-grandmother was enslaved by Preston Brooks and his family, I am somehow learning that she probably overheard Preston talking about how he whooped, what's his name?
Charles Sumner.
Charles Sumner. She was feeding him. She was putting food on the table while he was talking about at the table. Yeah, I beat that man. I beat him because I felt like he was not doing what he was supposed to do. And then he talked about my uncle. Dad, I did it because he talked about your brother-in-law. He had no business doing that. Well, son, you know, she was there. She was there with these conversations. She was there. She was all in that. So these are the things that we're picking up.
To provide an example that backs up what you just said, historians will write about the first Africans of Virginia in one way, describing them as slaves. And then you have genealogical researchers and historical researchers like Catherine Knight and Shelley and Rick Murphy.
And Kevin Levin.
Who went back to the primary documents of the period. And they're like, they weren't slaves. They weren't free. They were like bonded servants, but they were not slaves. But if you read history books, in particular history books written by some really respected names in kind of what the white historical community, they call them slaves. So if you're a history student, you're reading these textbooks that are misidentifying who these people were and what their place in that colonial Virginia society was. And then you get arguments between entrenched historians and then researchers like Rick and Catherine, who know their stuff. They've seen documents that the historians haven't even seen. So I mean, again, that just backs up what you're saying perfectly.
Yeah, I was trying to find Kevin's book. I thought it was in here. It's not in here, but he had, like, for example, you remember in his book he put a copy of one of the forms, one of the pension forms.
Yep.
And it was talking about in the pension forms where they're trying to prove that this person, because he filled out a pension form, this meant that he was a soldier. When in actuality, it wasn't a pension form. It didn't say that he was a soldier. It actually called him not a slave, but it didn't call him a soldier.
No, he was a camp worker. I'm pretty sure the term was camp worker. It was something like that.
something to that extent, but he wasn't a soldier. But yet when the Confederacy, the Sons of Confederacy talk about it, they say, oh, he has this form, and because he has this form, then that means he was a soldier. Because he completed this particular form, he was a soldier. No, it doesn't, because the form does not call him a soldier. It never called him a soldier. So to sit here and actually look at this form and use it as such is wrong. If you're going by the wording, this is your wording. This is what you're saying. So how do you switch it up? It's like Malcolm X. When he was in jail, the one thing that they did to him was made him look at the dictionary. And when they looked at the dictionary, they made him go through that dictionary and learn the meaning of every word. If you're going to use your words and go by the meaning of each and every last one of those words, if I'm taking the meaning of this word, then according to the meaning of this word, this is not a soldier. And that's what he's pointing out. Now, I'm not a follower of Islam or anything like that. Let me be clear. Let me be clear. But overall, that's what it's saying. That's what they're, trying to get across. So
now, I've got another question from Dakota Strong. Because society treats different skin colors differently, whether we want to identify our race or not. Society treats you differently based on your perceived race. So there are two issues. One, how we identify ourselves, and two, how society treats you based on your perceived race, aka skin color. So I'm going to try to tackle the first one. How do we identify ourselves? How we identify ourselves, I guess, would be largely determined on a specific outcome. And I'm going to use an example. One of the things that's really frustrated me is the conversation amongst the American descendant of slaves, otherwise known as ADOS community, who, as an American descendant of a slave, I am one, and I support a lot of what they say. But they're trying to come up with a kind of slightly tortured label that applies solely for people with enslaved ancestry in America before 1865, to the exclusion of all others. And to me, that's almost destined to fail at the hurdle, because there was more African descended people in the colonies and in the Republic before 1865 during that experience. And again, it's kind of torture, because then what do you do with people who were enslaved, who were manumitted? Now they're free. So we have one group of people who are free, like the Kumbos and the Driggers and all of those families. You know, they were free from the 1600s on down. But then over those centuries, you did have enslaved people who were manumitted. So what? All of a sudden, their free ancestors wouldn't technically fit that categorization. So in terms of coming up with a label, we need to be clear as a people what the object or objective that we want to achieve would be. I think it's going to be really difficult, because as we've repeatedly said during the show, we are not a monolithic people. We may share commonness in terms of being African descended, but for some of us, that's where the similarity is going to end.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. And as far as what is your thoughts on the second one? What we want to call ourselves would be determine how society treats you based on your perceived race. That sounds kind of passive to me, like you're trying to seek kind of American society, however you want to describe that, approval. I think it's for us to come up with our own definition or our own kind of categorization system, if you want to think about it that way. And then we tell America, we as a people have had this discussion. It's not going to be an easy discussion. It's not going to be a quick one. There's not going to be a quick solution, but we as a people have had a conversation. This is how we see ourselves, and this is the term that we want to use. If Jesse Jackson, and I can't remember her name that I read from the article, could do it in 1970 with African American, why can't we do it in 2020? But get something that the majority of people have an invitation to participate and to feed back into in order to come up with that new designation. What are your thoughts on that one about?
No, I mean, I agree with you.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with it, everything you just said.
And we should also not allow society to treat different people with different skin tones differently. That's gone on for far too long, and we need to stop that. We need to stop that nonsense. We are people.
And we need to stop doing it amongst ourselves. How about that?
Yeah. Amen. Amen to that. You
How
know,
about
at
that?
the end of the day, regardless of your melanation level or how your ancestry expresses itself physically, we are all people. We are all Americans. We're all looking for our slice of the American dream. We're all looking for safety for ourselves, our family, and our children. I don't care what ethnic group you identify with, your melanation level, educational attainment, any of that stuff. We all have the same basic needs and requirement, and the need to feel safe, especially for people of color, however you describe yourself in the current climate.
You know, my biggest issue about this whole situation is we can't agree. Like every other Every other race can, but we can't. Like, we can't seem to figure it out. We can't seem to come together.
I think
Like,
that's because we're not monolithic and because our stories are coming from so many different places, and so much of that story has been robbed from us.
yeah, but there was a moment. There was, I just feel like there was at least one moment that we did. And there's always one moment in history that we have. You know, this isn't the first time. We always have a moment that we do. You know what I'm saying? Like,
but I don't think that's comfortable with any group of people. I mean, I'm just thinking about the African history that I'm familiar with and that I know, modern African history. African ethnic groups don't get along. Wars being fought in Africa, either inside of an African country or outside of an African country. Sudan wouldn't have had to be split in half because two different ethnic groups in the same country couldn't get along in Africa. So are we trying to force ourselves to do something that fundamentally, and I'm just pitching this out there, I'm not saying I believe this or not, are we forcing ourselves to do something that maybe human beings, just on a general fundamental level, can't do? Look at Britain. You know, there's a lot of shared commonality. I mean, there are distinctly different groups of ancient people there. They had far longer to get their act together in terms of a national ethnic identity. They fight. Some of them still fight to this day. The discord between the Welsh and the English, you get them on the wrong day, that can be lively, and that's putting it mildly. I don't know. Sometimes I think we try to force ourselves to do something that maybe fundamentally isn't possible to do.
I'm not. Well, I guess. No, I mean, I guess. I don't know. I'm just to a point where it's just it just seems like it happens so much so for us and not as much for others.
I think others had a little longer to kind of work it out. And again, Germany and Italy, two perfect examples. I mean, they weren't even unified countries until the middle of the 1800s. And there is still, within the Germanness and the Italianness, there's different kind of cultural groups or ethnic groups or admixtures, and they actively fight against one another. That's why in Italy, you still hear to this day about northern Italians want to be their own country and just ignore southern Italians. They're like, they're not really one of us. You literally hear that in Italy to this day, and they have far longer to get their act together than we have. I mean, we're still a young country. We are still relatively a young country, going through some rather harsh growing pains.
But okay, so I'm looking at some of the quotes in here and some of the statements, and like Shelley made a comment and she said that is the white influence for us not to come together. And then Emily Davis said that too was created by whites. If you were light or white looking, you worked in the house, got the better jobs, etc. You know, the regular stuff. She said then some learned.
Okay, can I just quickly jump in on that one? Mm-hmm. This is something that frustrates me a bit. Okay. People who enslaved working in a house, okay, on one hand, you may have had a moderately more comfortable existence because you were in the house, you weren't in the field, working in the hot sun, being bitten by bugs and bitten by poisonous snakes and all the rest of it. But you were also in the direct line of fire. If your mistress was having a bad day and she didn't want to take it out on her kids, who's she going to take it out on? her black housemaid, the mammies, all of the enslaved women in the household that were under her control. And if the monster was feeling a bit randy and his wife wasn't exactly accommodating, who was going to get it? One of the black enslaved women. So I understand the difference between the demands of working in the fields or any other occupation that was outside of the home and those working in it. But I'm going to push back slightly, saying that anyone who worked in the big house had a totally easy ride of it. Because I'm telling you, a lot of my mulatto ancestors came out of unions between enslaved house workers, house slaves, and the master of the household. But
I mean, okay. So I understand what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, dang, the question is gone. Shoot.
Well, one thing while you're looking for that, I'm not being political about this, but the reason that prompted this whole conversation with Danya to begin with was commentary about Kamala Harris. One, that she wasn't black. Well, I'm sorry, if you have black Jamaican ancestry, you are an African descended person. I just want to be totally clear on that point. The other thing was the most ridiculous thing that I've seen, and it's been used by her white political adversaries, but it's also been used by people within the black community, trying to say that she is not qualified to be the vice presidential candidate because she's a descendant of a slave owner. Well, I'm a descendant of several slave owners. I have enslavers all over my tree. Dawn is a descendant of enslavers. All of our South Carolina family that we connect to are descendants of enslavers. If you have a modicum of European DNA and you have Black American ancestry that predates 1865, the chances are pretty high you're a descendant of a slave owner.
Without a doubt.
So I want to take that whole argument right off the table.
And I want to add to that. Can I add to that real quick?
By all means.
Remember the if you got a drop, that one drop rule?
Yep.
Of black, then you black, she black.
Mm-hmm.
Y'all need to stop that. Let's just say,
high five. I didn't even
high five, because that one drop rule, don't let it stop playing. Y'all need to stop playing. If she black when she get the one drop rule, then she black all the time. Y'all need to cut that action out. They tried it with Obama. Oh, he's white. Well, remember he got his half white. This, that, and the third. Now he half white. But before, y'all was always coming with the with all of that stuff, talking about this a black man, this and this, that, and the third. But then when he was doing good and he was doing he is half white. Miss me with that. Seriously. I do not want to hear it. Miss me with that. That is crazy.
I'm just going to say, tell me that Miss Harris has not, in her, living in the United States, has not had the N-bomb either hurled in her face directly or said about her behind her back.
We all have. We all have. So
I appreciate and respect that the different Caribbean islands have their different cultures and their different histories and their different expressions of their Africanness. The only, I still come back to the point that it just happened that her ancestor ship went to Jamaica. Ours came here, but I'm also going to say, learn your history. Because Donnie and I both descend, as well as many of our Edgefield family descend, from the first settlers, European settlers of the Carolina Territory. This is before it was even split into North and South Carolina Territory, the Carolina Territory. I can't remember what year it was. It's in Donnie's book. Now these men came from Bermuda. Did they leave their slaves behind in Bermuda, Donnie, or did they bring them on over here to South Carolina?
Oh, no, they brought them here.
And there were people who came from Jamaica and they brought their slaves with them too. And there were people who were here who went to the Caribbean who took their slaves from America to the Caribbean.
That's right.
So you read your history, and this isn't even preaching to the genealogy adventures audience, because I know you all are very clued up people and very well read. Learn your history, read the books. There are all kinds of connections between the Caribbean, the British held Caribbean specifically,
That's
and
right.
just like there were links between Haiti and Louisiana, back and forth, especially after the Haitian Revolution. Where do you think all those French-speaking enslavers went to? They didn't go to British held. The British were the enemy at that time. Where did they go? Louisiana.
Mm-hmm.
They're enslaved people with them if they could. Obviously,
That's
they were
right.
trying to get out of Dodge before they got strung up or killed. But they took what they could, including their enslaved people, to Louisiana. So what I'm trying to say is, history is a complicated, messy, multi-layered mess that I think people try to ignore the inconvenient parts or try to oversimplify it. It was a messy business.
Yeah. So,
So for me, I'm just overjoyed that we have a woman of color, a Black woman who is a VP candidate. I don't care
right.
if one parent's coming from India and another parent's coming from Jamaica. I don't care. I just think it's really cool that has happened. End of story. And the attacks on her Blackness and the attacks on her Americanness frustrates my soul to no end because it's unwarranted and it's undeserved. You want to critique her capability of being a VP based on her track record, what she's voted for, her professional past. That's a whole other conversation. But her Blackness and her Americanness, I'll fight you on that all day.
Yeah. And the thing is, I think she kind of covered that when she said the hospital that she was born in. So yeah, I was loving that. When she told him the hospital she was born in, that was enough. She told him, and I appreciated that because he sure tried to say that she wasn't born in America. She, wasn't born in America. He's started the birtherism thing, but we're not going into politics like that. We just, at that particular, I'm, yeah, my fault. Blame my headache. So, but, anywho, I hope you guys are we done?
Well, I've noticed a lot of comments. Does anyone have any questions or kind of any points that they want to discuss? Oh, Bernice, I love Bernice's comment. Oh, I'm going to tell a really funny story after I read this. Bernice Bennett said, I went to college with the I am Black and I'm proud era, and I prefer Black and Angela Davis and Stokely were our peeps back then, although I
Yeah.
will switch back and forth to African American depending on the context. I was 5 or 6 years old, and we were taking the annual trip from Connecticut to see my family in DC, because we stay with them for like 2 weeks every summer. My father was, oh, that's right, he was on active duty in the Navy, so he was on board a submarine, and my mother didn't drive at that point, so we took Amtrak from Connecticut to DC. This is about 1971, 1972, and my brother and sister thought it would be really hysterical to get me to run up and down in the Amtrak carriage, basically singing I'm Black and I'm proud. They had me up and down. Do you know people were clapping? I will always remember that. Get my sister to tell you that story. They were little.
I'm gonna have to get her to tell me that.
See this little kid, horrible 1970s stripy clothing and plaid shorts.
You said horrible 1970.
Oh, they had some nasty clothes in the 70s. Going, I'm Black and I'm proud. LaBrenda makes a good point, picking up on something that Shelley must have said previously, going, Shelley Murphy is right. We American Blacks are socialized this way. I think that's probably when we were saying, why can't we just all come together?
Yeah, I mean we are, but as far as all of that is concerned, I think that at some point we've known that, and at some point now it gets old. To We know that, and me being I'm 48, and I'm rearing my children to know the difference. I know I'm not the only one that's rearing my children to know the difference. So when does it get to a point where you're not doing that anymore and you need to rear your children differently? I mean, you got to learn that you got to rear your children to be a certain way. You have to. That's ridiculous. And you've already changed the you talk about changing the narrative and changing the direction of how to do things. We've actually changed the direction, because when they came over on these boats, they had to work together. It was mandatory for them to do that. And whether we want to realize this or not, they were working together back in the day. Please don't get that twisted. Back in the day, if they had not been working together, we would not be where we are today. We would not have the HBCUs that we have today. We would not be where we are today. We would not have the civil rights that we have. We would not have the right to vote. We literally would not be where we are right at this moment. So don't tell me Black people did not work together back then. We don't work together now. We got lazy.
How about this? I wish I could find the comment, it disappeared. Reclaiming the word Black, taking all the negative, we as a people reclaiming the word Black, taking the negative out of it. Now that's not going to be easy, it's not going to be straightforward. If we could break the connection between African and Black equaling bad, backwards, all the negative connotations that are with that. So things like Black magic, it's just, come up with another way of saying that. Or what are other phrases that include the word Black that automatically denote something that's negative, bad, that kind of a thing. I think that's part of the problem. I don't have a solution for it. I don't even have a way forward to be able to reclaim that. Because it wasn't always that way. There's a really famous historical account of one of the many, many King Louis. It may have been King Louis the 13th or 14th, who met that African king, who was like the wealthiest human being who has ever lived, who came with, basically his court to Versailles, with culture and musicians, and just because he wanted to demonstrate that he came from a civilized people. He's like, I'm richer than you, I'm more powerful.
Right. Right. I mean, but that's just it. So you're saying that Black became negative. When did it become negative? Because, like, okay, so LaBrenda says you're woke, Danya. Not everyone is. I didn't know that. And then Emily says no, she is a part of both of her parents. No parent is a throwaway to fit a particular narrative. Not really understanding that one. Then LaBrenda says we're still producing children like Susan Rice's son, a proud Trumpite. I don't know. But then LaBrenda says that's what the 60s were all about, Brian, reclaiming Blackness. So I'm lost with both of that, because the first thing that's coming in my mind is James Brown, say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud. So that's him reclaiming Blackness, saying I'm Black and I'm proud. But when was it lost in the 60s? What happened? Because when I think of the Blackness and the research that I've done, they were back then. My uncle and them in 39, that's when the what's the name of it? Technically the civil rights didn't start. The civil rights movement, it didn't start in the in 55 or whatever. It actually started earlier than that. The precursor to that was what is the name of it? The Black Congress.
Right.
Yeah, and it was at Howard University. And my uncle was a part of it. I had an uncle who was a part of that. And they were, they were going around to different cities and they were like, okay, working on trying to get stuff done as far as that was concerned. So they were still doing the same things that their families had done prior to, as far as keeping up what their families had done before. They
I
didn't.
may have a partial answer to you, and LaBrenda, Shelley, or anyone else can chime in on this one. I think it started in the 1970s. When was it that the federal government changed like welfare law, the welfare rules to start, which in effect broke up the Black family? All of a sudden, Black men couldn't be living in the same household as their spouse or their partner and their children, because then they got less money and less government assistance. There was a point, it was after the 60s, because if you look at, I wish I had written these stats down. I can't remember the percentages off the top of my head. For the longest time, the kind of traditional Black household was a married couple with kids. Believe it or not, many of them homeowners. I mean, may not have had the, earning loads and loads of money, but you're talking about a society where things didn't cost as much back then. If you had a factory job, your wife could stay home, cook, raise the kids, you could go to work, you had your mortgage, but there was a time period after the 60s where that started to break down. And I know that the federal government had a hand in that, and it has something to do with welfare, and who got what money and what conditions you got the money under.
As a person who at one point in my life was on public assistance, I do know that if your mate was in the house with you, you couldn't get any. Yeah. I do know something about that.
So you couldn't get anything.
Yeah.
Oh.
Tiffany said it was enforced in 1971, which is when I was born.
Got it.
I was 72. I was born. Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know. I guess it's
okay. I guess the other side of what I mean about reclaiming Blackness, when Ronald Reagan used the term welfare queen, there was not a doubt in anyone's mind who he was talking about when he used that phrase. People immediately went there. That wasn't even a dog whistle. That was like a foghorn to America, who he was talking about with that phrase. And the crazy thing is, the federal government created the system that led to him being able to describe a whole class of people under that term. See, things get done to us, and then we're blamed for the fact that they got done to us. As a Black American, that's something that I continually try to wrap my head around. Our ancestors were enslaved, but somehow other parts of American society, it's like, well, it was their fault for being enslaved. And then you have Black people who are like, well, they wanted to be slaves because, well, you have Kanye West. They wanted to be slaves. He said that.
Well, I don't mention Kanye because Kanye is sick.
But he's not the only one who said that or believes that.
Well, yeah, that's true. But for him, I literally do. Kanye is sick. And because Kanye is sick, nothing he says means anything to me.
But it does mean things to us. I get that. I totally respect what you say, and
yeah,
I agree with
nothing he says, it shouldn't even matter to people, because we don't look at, and I'm getting ready to say this, and if it's a white person up here, blame my headache. If a white person was to say this, you'd be like, oh, he's sick. But when a Black person says, people look at him and they blame him for it. I'm not going to blame that man for the stuff that he does because he's sick. Just like with that daggone boy, Dylan Roof. Dylan Roof, he's not sick. There was He knew what he was doing. He sat there and he prayed with them. He prayed with those people in that church. He knew exactly what he was doing. He premeditated. He knew what he was doing. You guys are good people, but I'm gonna have to kill you anyway. That was his whole thought process. Y'all fed him. You took him to the store, took him to Burger King, got him something to eat. You gave him time. You did all of these different things. No, I don't. You understand what I'm saying? So I'm sorry. Kanye West is sick, and that's that. People need to stop looking at this sick man and taking his words as law. They got to stop doing that.
I'm trying to think of someone else who said the same thing, but like I said, within the overall context, what I'm saying is, think stuff gets done to us, and then we as a people get blamed for the fact that it got done to us.
That is true. That is true. And I agree with you on that. I do. So I don't know, but
So again, I don't have a way forward. It's not for us or for me to come up with a way forward. I welcome and look forward to the day when we as a people can sit down and respectfully, mindful of people's different experiences within their Blackness, within this country, to have a conversation about whether these labels need to be revised, if they are, what are the options, what would people be happy about, but also chipping away and addressing the underlying history and causes and reasons behind it. Because
right.
I don't want my grandnieces and nephews to be sitting on a whatever the equivalent of Zoom is going to be and later in the 21st century, having this conversation.
Again, exactly. Because truth be told, the conversation was had in the 19th, and it was probably had in the 18th without even people realizing that they were actually having it. Let's just keep it real. I mean, these conversations they've been had.
Yeah, like that article that Tom Smith wrote, as early as 1880s.
They've been had. They've been had. You know, these conversations are constant. This is not the first time that this conversation has been had, and it's not going to be the last. And you know, we need it done. We just simply need it. We need a last. We need an end date on this conversation. We really do. This is a conversation that needs an end date. There's several conversations out here that need an end date, and this is one of them. At this point.
And in the vein of starting to wrap things up, this country, I know America does not like to have difficult conversations, but when it comes to race and ethnicity and the history of it and the tortured history of it, we have to deal with it, because that will always be America's Achilles heel. Look how easy it's been for Putin to play the race card. He knows as soon as he plays the race card, not only are Black and whites going to be at it with each other, actually I'm going to say Black, white, and Latino are going to be at each other's throats. He knows how, the Russians know how to play even Black people off one another. And they do it very, very well. And they are not the only ones. The Chinese are doing it. The North Koreans are doing it.
That's right.
It is the easiest Achilles heel for America to wrap. What's the strongest element? Teflon? Not Teflon, titanium. We need to wrap titanium around that. Fix it.
I mean, really. I mean, really, we got to start teaching our children properly. You got to start. I mean, if you're not doing anything, please teach common sense to your kids. Please teach. I mean, start looking at things outside of the box, y'all, because I know I look at stuff outside of the box all the time. And that's what we need to start doing. We need to start teaching our children to look outside of the box. We need to start looking at things in a totally different way. You need to start teaching your children to look at things the same way you look at things when you're doing your research. Point blank.
And it's kind of in a time of COVID and hopefully mostly online learning, I know that's not great for young developing minds. Take this time to include African American history.
Yep.
And what your kids are being taught. Now, I hated my father for the longest time making me do it, but I lived in a majority white town in a majority white school, and he knew I wasn't being taught Black history. Once a week, he'd make me go to the library, the town library. Sharon Rowe will love that, hearing about a parent who loved the library system. And I would have to take 2 books, and I would have to, that was related to either a Black historical figure. It didn't even have to be American, just a Black historical figure, or a thing about Black American history. And I would have to write a book report. And then every Wednesday at dinner, sitting at the table with the family, I would have to go over what I had learned, basically present my book report at dinner. I hated him for it. As an adult, I love him for it, because that's where I learned a lot of my African American history. Him making me go to a library every single week to get 2 books to write a summary book report. You know, in the family, you know, the family would chime in, you know, with additional information.
Right. So I'm glad we had this conversation, like Carol Burnett. I'm so glad we had this time together.
Thank you all for bearing with us, because this is actually, it's one of our epic hour and a half. I didn't think it was going to go for an hour and a half, but it's been a good conversation. I hope everyone's enjoyed it.
Yes, yes. Yeah, we got as high as about 75 people on this at one point. 75, 80 people. So look out, guys. Season 4 is going to be hot. We're excited.
So we may be doing one more special, but you know, we will definitely be back with you 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Sunday, the 27th of September. And what?
Yes.
I'm not even going to spoil it. What a show that's going to be.
Right.
Oh, well, you know already. We've posted it. The show's going to be on the topic about getting your head right before, you know, during the course of starting African American research, getting your mind, your spirit, and your soul right.
Yes. Yeah, we'll have a little homework project in the midst of that too. So, okay, guys.
Thank you very much for sharing your Sunday with us. We hope we've given you lots of good stuff to think about and to ponder and carry on conversations on your own on the subject.
Yeah. All right. So see you guys soon. Bye.
Right. Bye.